Have you ever felt like you're carrying a pain no one else can see? Like something's broken inside you, and you don't even know how to explain it? That's exactly how Abigail felt. And for a long time she thought it was the end. That pain was a punishment, a flaw, something she had to hide. But what if it's the opposite? What if the pain you hate today is actually the silent call that's going to heal you tomorrow? This is the story of a young woman who discovered that not every wound comes to destroy you. Some show up to wake you up. Abigail wasn't the kind of person who showed pain. She had a gentle smile, calm words, and always said, "I'm fine." But anyone who really knew her, or at least tried to, sensed there was more behind that distant look. She lost her dad at 17. It wasn't unexpected. Cancer had warned them. But her heart was never ready. He was her best friend, her safe place, her compass. And when he passed, something inside her got lost too. It wasn't soap opera crying. It was silence. A painful, suffocating silence. Life went on. College, new friends, smiles and photos. But inside she felt like a beautiful house crumbling on the inside. At 23, living alone in a big city, Abigail worked as an assistant at a publishing house. The job was good, the pay decent, and she even got compliments. But deep down, everything felt meaningless, like life had lost its color. And she didn't even know what she was searching for anymore. Some nights she'd wake up with a heavy chest and a need to cry without knowing why. She'd turn on the light, grab a notebook, and write scattered phrases. Things from the soul, like hidden prayers. God, can I still be healed? Will this ever make sense? I just want peace. One of those nights, surrounded by scattered words and silent tears, something different happened. Abigail was flipping through an old high school diary when she found a letter she'd completely forgotten about. It was from her dad, written shortly before he passed, left between books like someone planting hope without rushing. Her hands trembled as she read, "Daughter, if you're reading this, it's because life went on, even without me. And if there's one thing I want you to never forget, it's this. Pain is also a seed. Plants faith, plants strength. And one day, it blooms." The words hit her like a whisper from heaven. It was like he knew she'd need those words at that exact moment. The next morning, Abigail wasn't a new woman. But something had shifted. Small, maybe invisible, but real. She felt the urge to go to church after years away. She sat in the back, no plans to talk to anyone. She just wanted to be there. And when the pastor started preaching, it felt like every word cut through her inner walls. He talked about healing, about how God sometimes allows the breaking to rebuild us better. And he said a phrase she'd never forget. "The wounds you're hiding may be exactly where God wants to breathe new life." Abigail left with her face stained by tears, but her eyes shining differently. For the first time in a long while, she felt she wasn't alone. That the pain wasn't a punishment. It was an invitation, called to draw near, to trust, to make space for something new to grow. Have you ever felt something like that? That the thing that's hurting you might somehow be the beginning of a transformation? Share in the comments if this has ever touched your heart. Sometimes, talking about pain is the first step to healing what we didn't even know needed healing. In the days that followed, Abigail started writing again. Not just scattered phrases but full pieces. Texts about pain, loss, faith, and new beginnings. At first, she didn't show anyone. It was just for her. It felt like every word helped stitch together the broken parts. Writing became a way to pray. And one late afternoon, in a small and almost empty cafe, she met someone who would change everything. He was sitting at the next table, reading the exact same book she had in her bag. She glanced over, noticed the cover, smiled without meaning to, and said, "That book saved me on my hardest days." He looked up surprised and replied sincerely, "It saved me too." The conversation started with literature, but within minutes, they were diving into deeper topics. Pain, faith, losses that left a mark. And in that unexpected dialogue, Abigail felt something new. Connection. It wasn't romance. It was recognition. Like meeting someone who also knew the dark valley but still chose to walk through it. In the days that followed, that cafe conversation happened again. Different tables, different times, but the same eyes that didn't need many words. His name was Caleb, a calm-eyed guy with a story just as marked by scars. He lost his mom as a kid, carried guilt for years, and found strength again through faith. He didn't talk about it easily, but with Abigail, the words found their place. It was like, for the first time, both had permission not to pretend, not to hide behind rehearsed phrases. And that safe space, built in everyday simplicity, became fertile ground for something new. Abigail began sharing her writings with Caleb. At first, embarrassed, almost apologizing for feeling too much, for writing too much. But he read everything carefully, offering not just compliments, but thoughtful questions, reflections, even respectful silence when needed. "Have you ever thought about publishing this?" he asked one day, after reading a piece about how God rebuilds us in silence. She shrugged, unsure if she was good enough. He replied with a sentence that shook something deep in her. "Maybe the world is waiting for someone who writes like they heal." Those words stuck with her. Deep down, Abigail knew she didn't write to be famous. She wrote because that's how she breathed. But something inside her, which once only wanted to hide, began to lean toward the light. Slowly she started, picking the most honest texts, organizing them with care, and created a small page online. No big expectations, just wanting to share with others what once helped her not give up. The name of the page: Flowers from the Silence. Because it was there, in the soil of her pain, that the first seeds began to sprout. The first few weeks were quiet. Few likes, a handful of comments. But what moved Abigail the most were the private messages. Strangers saying they cried reading her words. People who found comfort, faith, courage to keep going. And she understood with a full heart that the calling wasn't about numbers. It was about purpose. About serving through what hurt, what broke, what God restored. But not everything was smooth. Over time, the exposure brought doubts, criticism, and insecurity. An old college classmate left a harsh comment, saying she was just romanticizing pain, and that everyone suffers, no need to make a show of it. That hit harder than it should have. Abigail stopped writing for days, wondering if it all made sense. If maybe she was exaggerating. Caleb noticed the silence and asked what happened. He told him. And he, with the same calm as always, said, "What comes from heaven doesn't need earthly validation. If God planted it, He'll sustain it." Those words brought Abigail back to what mattered. She realized even discouragement is part of the process. That even when you're on the right path, there will be resistance. But a true calling has deep roots. And roots don't shake easily. It was during that up and down season that Abigail had a dream. One of those dreams that makes you wake up with tears in your eyes and a full heart. She was walking through a field of flowers, but all the flowers were wilted. In the center of the field stood a small tree with dry leaves. She walked toward it slowly and heard a voice say, "Water it with what you have." She looked for water, for tools, for something useful. But she had nothing, just a heavy heart. So she knelt down and started to cry. And each tear that hit the ground made flowers bloom around the tree. She woke up with that image carved into her memory. And she understood. Sometimes all you have is your pain. But even that, God can use as a watering can. That same morning, still teary-eyed and stirred by the dream, Abigail grabbed her notebook and wrote like never before. The words flowed like a river after rain. They weren't just texts now, they were testimonies. Each line seemed to rescue a part of her that she had tried to silence for so long. She wrote about her dad, about the fear of not being enough, about the days she thought of giving up. And for the first time, she wrote about the faith that held her when everything else was falling apart. The faith that didn't scream but whispered, "You're still here." And that's already a miracle. Over time, her page, Flowers from the Silence, grew. But more than followers, what kept growing were the stories sent her way. People who had lost children, jobs, relationships. Folks who cried in bathroom stalls, smiled out of obligation, and had once thought about disappearing. but also people who, after reading her words, found a thread of hope, a reason to try again. Abigail read every message like listening to a prayer, and she responded with care, even if it was just a "you're not alone." Little by little, she started getting invited to speak at small gatherings, support groups, even Christian events for young people. The quiet girl from years ago now stood on small stages to talk about what God had done with her pain. It wasn't about performance. It was about presence, being there whole even with scars. Because now she knew, what once hurt so much was the very thing God was using to heal others through her. At one of those talks, an older woman approached her with tears in her eyes. She held Abigail's hands tightly and said, "You said exactly what I was never able to say. Carried my pain alone for years. And now I understand. It brought me back to God." Abigail smiled, and in that moment, she felt that everything, even the hardest moments, made sense. The pain wasn't the end. It was the way. And the way led to healing. On a cold night back home, Abigail lit a candle, grabbed her notebook, and wrote on the last page, "The pain I hated brought me here. Brought me back to myself, and taught me that God doesn't waste suffering. He transforms it." She closed the notebook with trembling hands, but a peaceful heart. It wasn't a full stop. It was just the start of a new chapter. A few weeks later, Caleb invited her to go on a retreat with him. A weekend away from the city, in a quiet, simple place surrounded by nature. She hesitated at first. Silence still brought back tough memories, but decided to go. On the second day, during a solo walk in the woods, she saw something that stopped her in her tracks. It was an old tree, broken in the middle, its trunk cracked wide, but with branches full of flowers. She walked up slowly, touched the wounded bark, and smiled. Right then, she felt God speaking to her again. Because that tree was her. Marked, yes, but alive. And blooming. Standing in front of that tree, Abigail prayed silently. "Thank you for not letting my pain go to waste." It was a short prayer, but loaded with everything she had lived through. And at that moment, she understood that healing isn't a destination. It's a process, journey. Sometimes painful, sometimes lonely, but always guided by grace. If this story touched something in you, maybe it's time to look at your own pain differently. Not as an enemy, but as a reminder that there's a bigger calling waiting for you. A purpose hidden in the ruins. And if you feel like you're in that process right now, stay. Because tomorrow might bloom from what still hurts today. Abigail came back from that retreat with sharper eyes. Not to problems, but to signs. Sometimes God speaks through a tree, a silence, or a random phrase at a cafe. And that's how she started living. Present, open, available. She still had hard days, of course. She hadn't become immune to pain. But now she knew what to do with it. She didn't shrink anymore. She wrote. She shared. She prayed. Day by day, her words reached further. Not because they were extraordinary, but because they were real. And nowadays that's rare. Months later, a small publishing house, one committed to faith-based projects, reached out to her. They had read her work online and wanted to talk about turning her texts into a book. Abigail was in shock. For so long, she believed she had nothing worth telling. And now, someone saw value in the most painful parts of her story. She prayed before answering. And once again she asked for peace, the kind she had learned to recognize as God's yes. And peace came. The process of writing the book was intense. Reliving certain moments took courage. But she knew each chapter was a seed planted in fertile ground. When she finally held the first printed copy in her hands, she cried. Not out of sadness but recognition. The cover was simple, with a carefully chosen title. Flowers from the Silence. The Pain That Healed Me. It felt like a seal on everything she had lived through. A reminder that God writes books with pages we once tried to tear out. At the book launch, Abigail was scared. Scared of being vulnerable, scared of judgment, scared no one would show up. But the room, small as it was full. Teary-eyed people, long hugs, heartfelt questions. She spoke from the heart, as always. No rehearsed speech. Just her story. And at the end, a 16-year-old girl walked up, shaking. She handed Abigail a letter and whispered, "I almost gave up until I found you." Abigail gripped her hand firmly. She didn't say much. Sometimes just being there is enough. That night, back on her porch, Abigail looked up at the sky. A soft breeze brushed her face like the air itself saying, "I'm here." She closed her eyes and smiled. She thought of her dad, a letter, pain, and how it all led her to this moment. Then she whispered to herself more than to the world, "If I had to suffer, at least let my pain heal someone else." And she knew without a doubt it already was. And you? Have you ever thought that the pain you hate might be carrying a calling waiting to bloom? That maybe, someday, what hurts today will be the exact thing that heals someone through you? Don't ignore that possibility. Because with God, nothing is wasted. He's an expert at turning tears into purpose. If this story spoke to your heart, consider subscribing to the channel. We share stories of hope like this one because we believe the right words can change everything. You might be the next to be touched, or maybe the one who touches others with what you've lived. Share this story with someone who's going through a tough time. Sometimes a simple video can be the start of a new journey. Abigail didn't stop after the book. She kept writing, guiding support groups, speaking at events, but above all, she kept listening. Because deep down, the greatest healing came when she realized she didn't need to be strong all the time, just honest. And when we're honest with our pain, God is faithful with His answers. This story isn't about heroic overcoming. It's about surrender. About admitting, yes, it hurt, but God was there. And He still is. You may not see it now. It may feel unfair, confusing, overwhelming. But don't give up. Because tomorrow might be the day that pain begins to bloom. And when it does, it'll all make sense. A sense only heaven can explain. Over time, Abigail realized that true healing wasn't a single moment, but a series of small miracles in everyday life. Coffee with someone who understands your silence. A tearful text that brings peace to someone else. A Bible verse that leaps off the page exactly when everything seems to fall apart. She learned to find beauty where she once saw only pain. And more than that, she learned pain can be a divine language, a way for God to touch the most hidden hearts. She began visiting hospitals, recovery homes, and Christian therapy groups, not as a speaker, but as someone who sat beside others. She listened, cried with them, and said simple soul-deep things. I know how it hurts, but I also know how it heals. In one of those meetings, a tired-eyed young woman said, "But I lost everything." Abigail held her hand, looked into her eyes, and replied, "Sometimes losing everything is how we find out God is what's left. And He is enough." These conversations weren't about religion. They were about the soul, about finding meaning in the broken pieces. And that's when Abigail truly understood her ministry. Not on stages, not in books, not in followers, but in human connection, in presence. Her testimony became a bridge. And the girl who once wanted to run from pain now helped others heal through it. One ordinary morning, while organizing her things for a new project, she found an old photo. She was next to her dad, smiling, hair pulled back, eyes full of light. Beside it, he had written a note. "You're going to grow up and change the world with a heart. Never forget who you are." Abigail cried reading it. Not out of sorrow but confirmation. He had seen something in her that she hadn't seen yet. And now, years later, it all made sense. She understood the biggest transformation doesn't happen when pain disappears, but when it changes roles. When it stops hurting and starts teaching. When it stops being a wound and becomes a testimony. Abigail's journey was never about perfection. It was about surrender. About realizing we don't have to face everything alone. Sometimes all we need is to let God remake us. In His time. Later that day, she got a message from Caleb. "Have you realized all of this started with a forgotten letter?" She smiled, typed back yes, and looked up at the sky. Because now she knew. Nothing is forgotten by God. Not a single tear, not one silent moment, not a muffled cry. everything is kept. And in the right time, He transforms it. If you made it this far, maybe you're going through your own pain right now. Maybe you don't see flowers yet or feel any comfort. But I want to remind you, with all the love in the world, that God is still writing your story. And if He's still writing, then it's not over. The pain that feels like it's tearing you apart today might be the very place where healing begins. And maybe one day you'll look back and understand it was God calling you, even when it felt like He was silent. If this story spoke to you, stay with us. Here we tell real stories of transformation, faith, and new beginnings. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you know someone in pain right now, share this video. It might be exactly the word they need today. Abigail moved forward, but never like before. Now she carried not just scars but flowers. Flowers that grew from silence. Flowers that bloomed where there was once only pain. And now, they bring beauty to the path of those still searching for hope. Because in the end, the pain you hate today really might be the calling that heals you tomorrow.